The first base position for the Pittsburgh Pirates has lacked consistency for a very long time. And sadly, in 2024, that didn't change. Is the future first baseman even on the roster? We'll discuss on today's episode of Locked On Pirates.
You are Locked On Pirates, your daily Pittsburgh Pirates podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome back, everybody, to the Locked On Pirates podcast here on the Locked On Podcast Network. My name is Ethan Smith, your host of the Locked On Pirates podcast, now in year 4, going into year 5 next season. You can find me on Twitter at MVP_Ethan or at Locked On Pirates for all of your news, analysis, opinions, and reactions to everything going on in the world of the Pittsburgh Pirates from a lifelong fan to lifelong fans just like you. If you're looking to go to a Pittsburgh Penguins game, maybe a Steeler game, or a concert, or a comedy show, or a theater, make sure you go to Game Time right now and download the Game Time app today and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply, but it's free money for you. Thank you guys for all being very gracious with me right now. A lot of changes are going on. I'll probably have a video about that sometime this week. So thank you all for always tuning in on YouTube and all of your podcast platforms. Thank you for being the best fans in the biz. We always love that as well. We're still doing the player review series right now. Normally it would be done by now, but again, a lot of turmoil going on over here. So we're still doing it. But little programming note, you'll have today, tomorrow, Thursday, and Friday. That will wrap up the infield. Then we'll have an outfield show on Monday. And then after that, we're going to be getting into a lot of different stuff on this channel, talking about Derek Shelton, looking back on the season. Eventually, when awards are announced, we'll talk about that. Plenty of other stuff. Today, though, the focus is on first base. And if you've been a Pirates fan really ever, then you would know that the first base position has been a position that's lacked consistency at this point for a very long time. You look at where this position has been, who's been a part of this position in recently, specifically. You're looking at guys like Rowdy Tellez, Connor Joe, G-Man Choi, even a John Nagowski, shout out. You're looking at guys like that. And really, even let's not forget, too, Michael Chavis. But none of those guys were ever going to be the future at this position. The last Pirates player that played the first base position that you could have considered even a future piece really at all was going to be Josh Bell. And eventually, of course, right when I started this show, almost, is when Josh Bell was moved to the Washington Nationals for Will Craig and Eddie Yean. And one of the lesser profound moves that we saw from Derek Shelton so far in his tenure. And then you go into 2024. You have Rowdy Tellez in hopes that he was going to be able to regain some of that 2022 form that we saw from Rowdy Tellez in Milwaukee, where he was a phenomenal power hitter. The defense was but obviously the offense was more than enough to make up for that. Then you look around and you were wondering, okay, what else? Because Connor Joe had the great start to the season and then just fizzled out and did not have a great year whatsoever. You're looking at a guy potentially like Billy Cook that could really move into this slot. But the one big news, as I'll say, quote unquote, that came out of first base was the idea that near the end of the year, Bryan Reynolds was doing infield drills with a first base glove. And there is a potential that Bryan Reynolds moves over to that position. Now, on this side of the screen, and I want all of you to share your comments all the time. On this side, me, I have no problem with that. because at least with that position, you would finally find consistency at first base. You would find consistency offensively. I think it would improve Bryan Reynolds defensively dramatically. And we've seen it already happen in baseball where it's been able to work. You look at a guy like Bryce Harper, who the Philadelphia Phillies obviously paid a large chunk of change to get away from the Washington Nationals in free agency. He starts as an outfielder in the corner outfield, eventually makes the transition to first base. The rest is history. He's one of the best players in baseball. He would have been either way. Bryan Reynolds has been a multi-time All-Star. He is the most consistent offensive bat that this team has. And I think that's where a potential move from left field to first base is big, because it has such a domino effect when you actually break down what happens here if Reynolds was to move over. Because, yes, first base would then have an offensive outburst from what we've seen at the position if Reynolds plays it. But then you're also kind of doing what you did with O'Neal Cruz when you moved him away from shortstop to center field. You saw another area of need, which in this case is first base, but in that case was center field, and you wanted to fill it and kind of fill it with somebody you could see playing that position for the next 5 years at minimum. And I think that's what the Pirates are doing with O'Neal Cruz. We're obviously going to have a show on O'Neal Cruz later this week when we talk about shortstop, which will be on Friday. But Reynolds at first, obviously this would be very new to him, but through the offseason, I'm sure with the talent that he possesses, it wouldn't be that major of a change. And again, the offense at the position would just dramatically improve. The Pirates have been in the bottom 10 in WAR and offensive WAR and slugging and OP, every major offensive category since I started this show. The Pirates have been in the bottom 10 in the league in first base value with those values. And it's no shock. I mean, you heard the guys that I named that have played the position. I've even forgot to mention Josh Van Meter, who's played it. You look at Jared Triolo, who's had limited time at the position and is also up for a Gold Glove this year. We'll talk about him tomorrow when we talk about second base, and probably talk about him a little bit when we talk about third base. But at the end of the day, going back to the original question, is the future first baseman on the roster at this current moment? I would say no. I don't know how much I really trust Billy Cook to hone that position down and how much time he really even has to really hone down any position at this point at the major league level. And we just don't know if it's Bryan Reynolds yet. Now, if it is Bryan Reynolds and he does come into the season, then obviously my answer is wrong. But at this current juncture, where you don't know if they're going to eventually make that defensive change, it kind of just leaves an open hole at the position, which could be filled via trade. It could be filled via free agency. It could be filled, as I mentioned, just by Reynolds or Billy Cook, and the Pirates could call it a day. And I think that last one, unless it's Reynolds, is obviously the worst one, depending on what player they go get in free agency or via trade. Now, I would imagine that no matter what they do, they are probably going to go get somebody as kind of a security blanket for the position. And I have no problem with that at this point. But at some point with first base, you do have to nail that position down. And there are a couple of positions around the diamond that are like that right now. You created one already with shortstop. And then if you do decide to move Reynolds, as I mentioned, you're going to be creating another in the outfield where you already have a multitude of questions going into next year. So there are questions on this team. And when you ask if the future first baseman is on the roster, the only way I answer yes is if Bryan Reynolds is moving over to that position and sticking there, not bouncing back and forth. Only if he just goes over there and sticks there. And in turn, when we're just talking about first base, it would create that consistency that we're looking for, which is what we're about to dive more into. But it would also create other problems on the roster as well. So keep that in mind. And it's just been a question that ever since I started the show and even before I started hosting this show that we've been trying to ask is, when are they going to find that first baseman? We don't really know. And it's unfortunate that we don't really know, because it is one of the more important positions in baseball, especially offensively now. And the Pirates are still seeking answers at that position. But what will it take to find some consistency? I kind of alluded to it already, but we're going to go into a little bit more next on Locked On Pirates. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app today. Use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply, because Game Time is, of course, the place where you can get killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee, which takes the guesswork out of buying tickets for anything you want to do. You can go see sports, you can go see a concert, you can go see a comedy show, you can see something in the theater, etc. You can get all-in pricing that will show you your total up front with no surprise fees at checkout. You can get a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you buy, and your purchase is covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry. So if you want to go to a Steeler game or a Penguin game right now, Game Time is the place to go. And if you download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase, folks, you'll be in. Terms do apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. And everybody, the World Series is here. We'll be giving my official predictions, my official look, and a thought that I have about this that I think a lot of you will like on the end of the show. But if you want in-depth analysis, if you want any opinion on the World Series, if you want all of that stuff all in one place, go to Locked On MLB and find Paul Francis Sullivan, a.k.a. Sully, as he's giving you all of your news and analysis on everything going on in the world of Major League Baseball. Right now, for the Pirates specifically, Major League Baseball is quiet for them. I mean, we haven't seen a Pirate game now. It is now October 22nd. We are just a week away from my birthday now. I will be 26 years old, folks. When I started this show, I was 22. Very long road that me and you all have been on. But once again, just to keep reiterating the point, first base is just an interesting spot because, again, if you're just breaking down what we saw from the position this year, you had Connor Joe at the beginning of the year being arguably the best offensive player the Pirates had on the team at the time from April and May. And there was a large portion of the fan base that was ready to just go ahead and get rid of Rowdy Tellez and just give the job to Connor Joe. It was his job to lose. There was nobody else taking it from him. He was just going to be the guy. They give Rowdy a couple more chances. And I will never forget being at the 4-1 Twins game, I believe is what the score of that game was, where Rowdy Tellez hit one over the wall, got a Rowdy chant, had another big hit in the game. And that was kind of the turning point for him. Rowdy Tellez had a very, and I mean very good summer for what it was worth, especially how he started the season. Because you look at what he was able to do, and it was nuts. I mean, the turnaround that he had was great. He was starting to hit lefties. He ended the season with a near 700 OPS after starting the year just so god-awfully bad. I mean, you look at his line in April. I mean, the slugging was 219. In May, it was 163. He brought that up to a 545 in June and a 578 in July. So Rowdy Tellez really turned it on after May concluded. He goes through the year, And then, of course, you had the whole thing where he got released 4 plate appearances before a bonus, and it became kind of national news. I don't want to call it national news, but it became something that was all over national media, I think is the word that I can look for here. Is it was all over the place. And by that point, excuse me, by that point, you were looking at Connor Joe kind of taking a step back. Billy Cook had been up here for a little bit, and then all those Bryan Reynolds rumors circulated. So what will it take for consistency at this position? And I think there's 2 avenues that you could go here with creating consistency at first base. The first is actually, it's going to kind of be like a web here. You're going to have like the first, and then there's going to be like 2 options. When you're talking about the first one, if you're just going to stick with one guy, I think you have those 2 options where you either move Reynolds to that position, and mind you, hope that it works out. I mean, I think it would work out. It's no guarantee that it would, but I think that it would. Or you go out in free agency and you go get, or trade, and you go get a guy that you think can just man that position completely, right? From both sides of the plate. The other, to create consistency, hopefully, in the hope of consistency, is that you do what you did again this year, where you have a lower level guy that you could put in against righties, but then you also still have somebody you could play against lefties. That could still be Connor Joe. If you want it to, that can be Billy Cook. I think another name to kind of watch in all of this now, and if you listen to the last show I did, which I apologize was almost a week ago, if you listen to the last show that I did on catchers, I kind of alluded to what Endy Rodriguez and his role will be in 2025. Now, by no means is Endy Rodriguez a known commodity. He didn't really do much at the big league level when he first got up here, and now he's been out for a year. He played a good bit of minor league baseball that last month, but still very much unknown on what Endy Rodriguez is. Could a move to first base be possible for him? I think it can. It's something he's done before. And with what's going on with catcher now, where you have Joey Bart being the clear front runner at the position, and then Henry Davis hopefully finally coming around and creating some kind of controversy at that position, where does that leave Endy Rodriguez in the mold? And on top of all this, the kid had a massive elbow surgery, basically Tommy John. First base would be a great position for him because he's not having to throw the ball nearly as much. Now, is Endy Rodriguez the prototypical first baseman? By no means, no. But I don't really care about prototypical stuff. I mean, O'Neal Cruz isn't your prototypical center fielder, but I think he's going to do phenomenal in that spot. Ellie De La Cruz, just to name a player on another team, isn't your typical shortstop. He has his problems defensively. Kid's very young, plenty of game in front of him. Endy Rodriguez, at the end of the day with first base, be average defensively at least, even a little bit below average. Who cares? But you have to hit the baseball at that position now. Period. That is a position the Pirates, for too long, have gotten absolutely really nothing out of offensively. Offense is going to be the calling card for this team and how high their ceiling can go. The pitching, is there. Even with injuries, I'll still confidently say the pitching staff is there. It's the offense now that has to step up. Does some of this go back to player development? Of course. When I started this show, I thought Mason Martin was going to be the second coming of Pedro Alvarez. And now he's playing independent baseball. You also look at some of the other guys they had, like Josiah Seitler. We'll see what happens with him. You look at, just thinking of other prospects, but that's the thing, though. The Pirates don't have a bona fide prospect to throw at that position. So now you're at a crossroads. I already mentioned I don't think the future first baseman is on the roster unless you move Bryan Reynolds over. So do you move your most consistent offensive player over to that position to then create another position of need? Or do you actually go out, find a consistent option in free agency or via trade, and make that position worth your while? That's the question the Pirates have to ask about first base going into free agency and trades and winter meetings. And that's what it'll take for consistency. You either move Bryan Reynolds over there or you find a way to bring somebody in that you can trust can hold down that position offensively, more so offensively than defensively, and can bring you some firepower from that position. That's how I feel on first base. Now, you get to hear a Pirates fan talk about Dodgers and Yankees. The World Series. That's your World Series, folks. I'm going to give some thoughts. I'm going to give a prediction and more next on Locked On Pirates. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make sure you go to FanDuel.com right now because NFL fans, you can win big on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. And for all my sports bettors out there, Monday, October 28th, and I will remind you on that day over at FanDuel, it is the sports equinox. We will have an NFL game, an NHL game, an NBA game, and a baseball game all in one day. So if you want to bet on them over at FanDuel, make sure you go to FanDuel.com right now. Use the code LOCKEDON. Place your first $5 bet to get $200 guaranteed on America's #1 sportsbook, FanDuel Sportsbook. And welcome, everybody, to the third and final part of today's episode of Locked On Pirates here on the Locked On Podcast Network, where, as Pirates fans, we get a World Series where we get to watch the LA Dodgers play the New York Yankees. After all the turmoil of the playoffs, after everything that happened here with this postseason, with the Tarek Skubal and the Gritty Tigers and the OMG Grimace Mets to everything in between, it ends up being the Dodgers and the Yankees. Now, you might be wondering, Ethan, how do you feel about this? How do you feel about Dodgers Yankees? Bluntly, probably the two best teams in baseball. Obviously, considering they're playing for the World Series. But you can make arguments about that. Two of the most storied franchises in baseball history. The most common World Series matchup in baseball history. And some of the biggest stars. I mean, you're going to have Shohei Ohtani, Aaron Judge, Juan Soto, Mookie Betts, Will Smith, Giancarlo Stanton, Gleyber Torres, Nestor Cortez is going to be back for this series. It's going to be interesting. Before I give a prediction, though, my thoughts on this, and I'm sure most of you, being Pirates fans like myself, have already seen this. When the Cleveland Guardians were eliminated by the New York Yankees, the Mets and Dodgers series was still going. So that meant that the top three payrolls in baseball, and say what you want about the New York Mets. Oh, well, you know, they have Scherzer and Verlander still on the books and blah. Yeah, whatever. They're still paying Francisco Lindor and technically Pete Alonso until he hits free agency. They're still an expensive team. But the Yankees and the Dodgers are the two most expensive teams in baseball. More so enough that they are well above the MLB league average in payroll. They have given out big money to big players, etc. I think this World Series is terrible for for small market teams. I do. Because the precedent that is set this season is that you spend a lot of money, you'll be in the World Series. So with that precedent, you might as well just eliminate Miami, Pittsburgh, Cincinnati, Milwaukee. I mean, even Kansas City, even though they gave Wood a big contract. Pretty much any team in the AL Central. The Nationals, Diamondbacks, who got there the year before, but clearly just got hot at the right time. The A's, the Mariners to a degree, the Angels to a degree. So you start to wonder, okay, how often does this happen? And, you have your success stories with small market teams. You have the Nationals in 2019. You have the Diamondbacks last year, even though I wouldn't consider them a small market team, considering they gave Carroll all that money. You obviously have the Moneyball Oakland Athletics, who sadly never won a championship, but were one of the better teams of that era. Then you have the Pirates in 2013 through 2015. But when you look at baseball under the microscope of just money, nearly every time you see in the Final Four, when you're talking about the NLCS and the ALCS and the World Series, it is almost always comprised of 3, sometimes all 4 teams that are up there in payroll in the top 10. Especially with this Yankees-Dodgers series, I do think that some of the spending is a little ridiculous in terms of how much teams like Pittsburgh just physically cannot do it. I don't want to hear you cry wolf on Bob Nutting here. He just can't give out $1.3 billion in salary. Can't happen. And those kind of payrolls, he just can't do it. So, yeah, do I like the matchup? Not really from that standpoint. Just from a baseball standpoint, yes, I do. 100%. I mean, you're getting probably the National League MVP in Shohei Ohtani facing the more unlikely American League MVP in Aaron Judge. It's 2 of the most storied franchises in baseball history. And when you look at this series just from baseball, I do think the Yankees have the advantage in pitching, which has been kind of what everybody has said about the Dodgers through this entire playoff run, is that everybody they've played has had the pitching advantage, yet here the Dodgers are. And the Yankees, I do think, have the advantage pitching-wise. Offensively, I would call it an even split. I think that it depends on which big-time player has the biggest series, and that goes for everybody. I'm talking about Betts. I'm talking about Ohtani. I'm talking about Judge. I'm talking about Soto. I'm talking about Will Smith. I'm talking about even Kike Hernandez. Talk about all of them. Which one has that marquee series that pushes their team over the edge? In what I've seen this postseason, it has come down to those big-time moments. Those big-time hits, those big-time moments from your unlikely heroes. Right now, I think the Yankees have more unlikely heroes on their roster than the Dodgers do. Giancarlo Stanton has had a crazy postseason. Gleyber Torres had a very good ALCS. And that's even before you get to Juan Soto and Aaron Judge. Juan Soto had his share of big hits in that series as well. I just think the Yankees offense is going to be too much. I think getting Nestor Cortez back is massive because their pitching is going to be in a much better spot. And I just think that ultimately the Dodgers pitching has to stop bailing them out at some point. I think that stops here. I do think we're in for a doozy. I think the Yankees are going to win in 7. They're going to win it in 7 games, and they're going to win their 29th. That's where I am. 28th. I don't remember. Their first one since 2009. I've only seen like 4 of them. I wish I could have said that about the Pirates, but we're here. So Yankees in 7, my official prediction. Between baseball's 2 highest spending teams. Take with that what you will. Folks, thank you so much for tuning in. Have a wonderful rest of your Tuesday evening. We'll be back tomorrow talking about second base and more on the Locked On Pirates podcast, where you can find this on YouTube and all of your audio platforms. Follow me on Twitter at MVP_Ethan or at Locked On Pirates. And again, have a wonderful Tuesday evening. We'll see you on the flip side.